Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something really specific, part of our CSWIP 3.1 exam prep series.
That's right.
So if you're gearing up for that welding inspector exam, well, this is definitely for you.
Yep, we're aiming to help you get exam ready.
Exactly. We're going to look at some real, exam-style multiple-choice questions. But here's the twist where we're not just finding the answer.
No, not just about ticking a box.
We want to dig into the why. Understand what it really means, help you build that intuition that separates the good inspectors from the truly great ones.
It's about critical thinking, isn't it? Not just memory. Understanding the principles behind the questions.
That's it, because knowing the why helps you in the field, not just in the exam room. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. Building that solid foundation.
All right, first question up. Picture this. Which of the following would be classed as the most serious type of defect?
Okay.
And your options are A, a buried linear slag inclusion, B, buried lack of ineron fusion, C, surface breaking lack of sidewall fusion, or D, surface porosity.
So take a second. Think about those. Which one jumps out as the biggest red flag?
Right. Well, the answer we're looking for here is C, surface breaking lack of sidewall fusion.
C. Okay. So why is that one the most serious? More so than, say, buried fusion issues?
Well, the key difference is that word surface breaking. Anything that breaks the surface is generally considered more critical than something buried inside the weld.
Why is that? Is it just easier to see, or?
It's more than that. A surface breaking defect acts as a stress riser. Think of it like a tiny crack already started on the surface.
Okay. So any stress on the part, concentrates right there.
Precisely. It's a natural point for a crack to start and grow from, especially under load or fatigue conditions. A buried defect might be cushioned a bit by the surrounding metal.
But a surface one is right there, exposed.
Exactly. Exposed to stress, to the environment, potential corrosion. It's just a much more vulnerable point.
Okay, that makes sense for surface breaking. But why lack of sidewall fusion specifically, compared to, say, surface porosity? Good question. Lack of sidewall fusion means the weld metal hasn't properly fused, hasn't bonded to the side of the joint, the base material.
So it's like a gap along the edge.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It's a linear discontinuity that directly reduces the load-bearing capacity of that weld. It fundamentally weakens the connection along that edge.
Whereas porosity is maybe more like little bubbles.
Right. Porosity, even surface porosity, is usually more rounded, more localized. While it's not good, and it is a stress riser, a linear lack of fusion often presents a much larger, sharper notch and a more significant reduction in the weld's effective cross-section. It's a major structural integrity issue.
Got it. So surface breaking is bad, but a surface breaking line defect that affects the actual joint integrity, like lack of sidewall fusion, that's the worst combination.
That's the key takeaway. It hits both criticality factors, surface location, and significant structural impact.
Okay, clear. Let's move to the next one. This shifts focus a bit to the process itself. You see a welder using an oxy-acetylene flame with a long feathered inner cone. What would be the effect of this on a carbon steel?
The flame reading question. Good one.
Your options. A, the weld could be hard and brittle. B, the weld metal could be too soft. C, there will be no effect. Or D, the weld will have undercut.
So that long feathered inner cone is the critical clue here.
What does that tell us?
That specific appearance means there's too much acetylene in the mix compared to oxygen. It's what we call a carburizing flame.
Carburizing, meaning it adds carbon.
Exactly. That excess acetylene breaks down and the carbon gets readily absorbed by the molten steel.
And what does extra carbon do to steel?
In this context, it's bad news. It forms iron carbides, which are very hard compounds. So the weld metal becomes harder, yes, but it also becomes very brittle.
Brittle, meaning it loses its toughness, its ability to bend or absorb impact.
Precisely. It loses ductility. So the answer is A. The weld could be hard and brittle, making it much more susceptible to cracking, either on cooling or later in service.
So just by looking at the flame, an inspector can predict a potential material problem.
Absolutely. That flame characteristic is a direct warning sign that the weld chemistry is being altered in a detrimental way for carbon steel. It's a process control issue with direct material consequences.
Okay, important link there between process observation and material properties. Let's look at question 3.
All right.
This one's about heat input. Welds made with very high heat input will show a reduction in what property suffers most? A, tensile ductility. B, notch toughness. C, fatigue strength. Or D, creep resistance. Lots of properties there.
Yeah, heat input affects several things, but there's usually a primary victim when it gets too high.
And that is?
Notch toughness.
Notch toughness. Why specifically notch toughness? What's the mechanism?
It's all about the microstructure. Very high heat input, especially if the cooling is slow, leads to significant grain coarsening in both the weld metal and the heat-affected zone, the HAZ.
Grain coursing, so the tiny crystals that make up the metal get bigger?
Exactly. Think of fine grains, like small interlocking bricks. They make a strong structure that resists cracks. Coarse grains are like big, clunky blocks. Cracks can travel through them or along their boundaries much more easily.
Ah, okay. So bigger grains mean weaker resistance to cracking.
Especially brittle cracking, yes. And notch toughness is specifically the material's ability to resist fracture when there's a notch or a stress concentration present.
Like a sharp corner or maybe even a small defect.
Precisely. Coarse grain structures have significantly lower notch toughness, particularly at lower temperatures. They become much more prone to brittle fracture initiating from any stress point.
So while high heat might affect other things slightly, the major hit is to the material's ability to handle stress concentrations without snapping.
That's generally the most significant and immediate consequence of severe grain coarsening due to excessive heat input. It's a major concern for structural integrity.
Right, that makes sense. Understanding that invisible change inside the metal. Okay, let's shift to safety now. Huge part of the job.
Absolutely paramount.
Question 4. You are to oversee the arc welding of some machined fittings and find they are cadmium plated. Would you? What's the immediate action?
Okay, this is a critical safety scenario.
Options. A, permit it to proceed. B, permitted to proceed with fume extraction. C, stop the operation at once. Or D, advise the welder to drink milk and proceed.
There's only one correct answer here, and it's non-negotiable. C, stop the operation at once.
Immediately. No hesitation.
Absolutely none. Welding on cadmium plating is extremely dangerous. The fumes produced are highly toxic.
How toxic are we talking? Like, just makes you feel unwell or?
Much worse. Cadmium fumes can cause severe lung damage, chemical pneumonitis, pulmonary edema, and can be fatal, even from relatively short exposures. Long-term, it can cause kidney failure and cancer.
Wow. Okay, so fume extraction isn't enough. Option B.
Given the extreme toxicity, standard fume extraction might not be sufficient to guarantee safety. The risk is simply too high. The only responsible action is to stop all work immediately until the hazard is properly assessed and controlled, which usually means removing the plating before welding.
And the milk thing. Option D.
Yeah, it sounds like an old wives' tale.
It is a dangerous one. There's absolutely no scientific basis for milk or anything else mitigating the effects of inhaling toxic metal fumes like cadmium. Stopping exposure is the only solution.
So the rule is simple. See cadmium, stop welding, full stop.
That's the rule. Safety first, always.
Okay.
An inspector has to be vigilant about hazardous materials.
Okay, powerful reminder there. Last question for this deep dive, number 5. Back to welding basics.
Let's see it.
Which of the following is not inert gas? We're talking shielding gases here.
Right.
Options. A, argon. B, xenon. C, carbon dioxide. D, helium. Which one doesn't fit the inert category?
Okay, so we need to remember what inert means in a welding context.
Which is?
It means the gas doesn't react chemically with the molten weld pool or the arc. It just provides a protective shield. Argon, xenon, and helium are noble gases. They are chemically inert.
So they just hang out and protect the weld?
Basically, yes. Carbon dioxide, CO2, however.
Okay.
That's the exception here. So the answer is C. But CO2 is used all the time as a shielding gas, isn't it, in MIG welding?
It is, very commonly, especially for steels. But it's technically not inert. In the heat of the arc, CO2 actually breaks down, dissociates, into carbon monoxide and oxygen.
Ah, and that oxygen can then react.
Exactly. That oxygen can react with the weld pool, influencing the weld chemistry, potentially causing some oxidation, affecting alloy recovery, and influencing the arc characteristics and penetration profile.
So because it reacts, it's classified differently.
Correct. We call it an active gas or sometimes part of a mixed gas when combined with inert gases. Using pure CO2 means you're using an active shielding gas, not an inert one.
So knowing that difference is crucial for choosing the right gas for the right material and process. Using CO2, where you need true inert shielding, like on stainless or aluminum, would cause problems.
Big problems. You'd get oxidation, potentially porosity, loss of corrosion resistance.
Yeah.
It fundamentally changes the game. So yes, knowing which gases are truly inert versus active is absolutely fundamental.
Got it. That distinction is key. Wow, okay, we've covered a lot of ground there.
We have, for defects to processes, parameters, safety, and gas basics.
Yeah, thinking about, the seriousness of surface defects, the clues in a flame, the hidden impact of heat input, that absolute priority of safety with things like cadmium, and even the basic chemistry of shielding gases.
And all these pieces, they fit together, don't they? It's about building that complete picture of what makes a sound, safe weld.
It really is. And like you said earlier, it's not just for the exam.
No, definitely not. If we connect this to the bigger picture, mastering these details isn't just about passing an exam. It's about developing the sharp eye and deep understanding necessary for true excellence and safety in the field of welding inspection.
Being that guardian of quality and safety, as you put it.
That's the goal. Understanding the why behind every observation, every rule.
Absolutely. So here's something to think about as we wrap up. What stands out to YU from today's questions about the incredible breadth of knowledge, the sharp eye, and maybe the profound responsibility required to be a top-tier welding inspector? Keep thinking, keep learning. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.